Before we witness the moment when Senator Terence Cross learned that interrupting someone who has evidence of your crimes only accelerates your own destruction, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because what you're about to witness demonstrates how desperate interruptions become confessions of guilt when met with prepared devastation. The National Legislative Ethics Committee hearing on judicial ethics reform had been Terence Cross's stage for nearly 2 hours, with the Eastbridge-educated senator performing his usual routine of condescending intellectualism mixed with theatrical outrage. He had been particularly aggressive that morning, using his prosecutorial background to badger witnesses, his debate champion skills to twist words, and his camera awareness to create clips for conservative media. When Congresswoman Janelle Crocker began her testimony about dark money's influence on judicial nominations, Cross had already interrupted her 3 times with procedural objections, each designed to throw her off rhythm and assert his dominance in the chamber. Crocker had been methodically presenting evidence about how special interest groups were essentially purchasing federal judgeships through strategic donations when Cross began his 4th interruption. But this time it was different. His usual calculated performance gave way to something more desperate. His voice carrying an edge of genuine panic that made everyone in the chamber take notice. He didn't wait for a pause in her presentation. Didn't pretend to raise a point of order. He simply started talking over her, his volume increasing with each word as if sheer noise could drown out what she was saying. Congresswoman Crocker. Cross practically shouted, half standing from his seat in a gesture that violated all senatorial decorum. You're engaged in McCarthy-like tactics, making accusations without evidence, smearing good people with innuendo and conspiracy theories. This is exactly the kind of destructive behavior that tears apart our institutions. You sit there with your prepared remarks and your little folder of supposed evidence, but what you're really doing is undermining the judicial confirmation process with baseless allegations designed to generate headlines rather than reveal truth. He continued his interruption, his words coming faster now, almost stumbling over each other in his haste to prevent Crocker from continuing. I've sat here for 2 hours listening to this character assassination disguised as oversight, and I won't allow it to continue. You want to talk about dark money? Let's talk about the dark money funding your own political career. Let's talk about the special interests that put you in office. Let's talk about your connections to radical left-wing organizations that want to destroy the Americordian judicial system. The chamber had erupted into chaos with Cross's increasingly frantic interruption. The committee chairman was banging his gavel, demanding order. Other senators were calling for Cross to follow procedure. The gallery was buzzing with shocked whispers at the unprecedented breach of decorum. Cross kept talking, his face reddening, sweat visible on his forehead, his hands gesturing wildly as he tried to filibuster Crocker's testimony through sheer verbal force. But through all of this chaos, Crocker sat perfectly still, watching Cross with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this moment. When Cross finally paused to take a breath, his chest heaving from his verbal assault, the chamber fell into an expectant silence. Everyone waited to see how Crocker would respond to such an aggressive interruption. She slowly reached into her folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and looked directly at Cross with the steady gaze of someone about to deliver a killing blow. When she spoke, her voice was so calm and controlled that it seemed to make the previous chaos even more jarring by contrast. Senator Cross, Crocker said, her words cutting through the tension like a surgical blade. Since you've chosen to interrupt me 4 times, let me address your concerns with one simple response. She held up the paper for everyone to see. This is a wire transfer receipt for $16 million from Harlan Crow to your Keystone Islands account dated 3 days before you pushed through the confirmation of Judge Madison, whose first ruling benefited Crow's companies by $200 million. You want to talk about dark money, Senator? Let's talk about the $73 million you've taken from billionaires to sell federal judgeships. Let's talk about the emails where you promise specific rulings in exchange for donations. Let's talk about the recording where you say, and I quote, "I don't care if they're qualified. If the check clears, they get the robe." The silence that followed was absolute. Cross's face went from red to white so quickly that some observers later said they thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The paper in Crocker's hand might as well have been a smoking gun for how completely it had destroyed Cross's attempted disruption. The other senators sat frozen, processing the implications of what they had just heard. The gallery was so quiet that the humming of the air conditioning seemed loud. But Crocker wasn't finished. She pulled out another document, her movements deliberate and calm. Your fifth interruption was going to be about my supposed radical connections. So, let me save you the trouble. This is your communication with Russian oligarch Oleg Volkov, where you promised to confirm judges who will rule favorably on cases involving Russian business interests in America. In exchange, $28 million was funneled through a network of shell companies to your various political organizations. You haven't just been selling judgeships, Senator Cross. You've been selling them to foreign adversaries. The investigation that had uncovered this explosive information about Cross had been conducted with extraordinary secrecy over the course of 18 months. It had begun when financial forensics experts noticed unusual patterns in campaign contributions to Cross's various political organizations. Money would appear from seemingly unconnected sources just days before or after crucial judicial confirmations. The patterns were too consistent to be coincidental. And when investigators began pulling the threads, they uncovered a web of corruption that exceeded even their worst suspicions. Terence Cross had cultivated an image as a principled constitutional conservative, a judicial originalist who fought for traditional values and legal restraint. His credentials were impeccable on paper: Eastbridge University, Cormont Law School, Supreme Tribunal clerkship, former state solicitor general. He wielded these credentials like weapons, using them to establish his intellectual superiority and his supposed commitment to the rule of law. His theatrical performances in legislative hearings had made him a hero to supporters who saw him as one of the few politicians smart enough and tough enough to fight the liberal establishment. What the investigation had revealed was that Cross's entire political persona was a carefully constructed facade hiding one of the most extensive judicial corruption schemes in Americorps history. He had essentially turned the federal judiciary into a commodity to be bought and sold, with himself as the broker taking enormous commissions for facilitating the sales. The scheme was sophisticated, involving multiple layers of shell companies, foreign bank accounts, and intermediaries who provided plausible deniability. While Cross collected millions for his influence over judicial confirmations, the Harlan-Crow connection was particularly damaging. Crow, a billionaire real estate developer with extensive business interests that regularly came before federal courts, had been secretly funding Cross for years through channels designed to avoid disclosure requirements. In exchange, Cross had pushed through the confirmations of 17 federal judges, who had all ruled favorably on cases involving Crow's businesses. The pattern was so consistent that statisticians calculated the probability of it being coincidence as effectively zero. As Cross sat in stunned silence, Crocker continued her methodical destruction of his career and reputation. She pulled out communication after communication, financial record after financial record, each one adding another layer to the pattern of corruption. "Here's your email to the Constitutional Order League," she read, "where you explicitly state that judicial nominations are for sale to the highest bidder with different price points for district courts, circuit courts, and potential Supreme Tribunal justices. You write that the base price for a district judge is $3 million, circuit is $7 million, and if we get another Supreme Tribunal opening, we're looking at $50 million minimum." She displayed bank records on the committee room screens, showing deposits that corresponded exactly to judicial confirmations Cross had championed. "Every single judge you've supported in the last 6 years has been paid for by someone with business before their courts. You've turned the federal judiciary into a pay-to-play scheme that makes a mockery of justice. And here's the most damaging part." She pulled out a transcript that made several senators gasp audibly. "This is from a recorded conversation where you discuss how to ensure these judges rule correctly on specific cases, including providing them with draft opinions written by the donors who paid for their confirmations." Cross finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled croak. "This is a setup," he said weakly. "These documents are fabricated. This is a deep state conspiracy to destroy me because I've been effective in fighting the liberal agenda." Crocker pulled out another document, this one bearing official Federal Bureau of Investigation's markings. Fabricated? This is a cooperation agreement signed by your former Chief of Staff, Marcus Davison, who has been wearing a wire for the FBI for the past 8 months. He's recorded over 100 hours of conversations where you explicitly discuss selling judgeships, including price negotiations and delivery guarantees. Would you like me to play some of those recordings for the committee? The mention of recordings caused complete pandemonium in the chamber. Several senators immediately called for a closed session to review classified evidence. Others demanded Cross's immediate removal from the committee. The gallery erupted with shouts from both supporters and opponents. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, threatening to clear the room if order wasn't restored. Through it all, Cross sat slumped in his chair, the fight completely gone out of him, looking like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. But Crocker saved her most devastating revelation for last. She pulled out a final set of documents, these marked with the highest level of classification and specifically declassified for this hearing. Senator Cross, your interruptions today weren't just desperate attempts to silence me. They were obstruction of justice. You knew this evidence existed because you've been under federal investigation for 2 years. You knew FBI agents were prepared to arrest you the moment this hearing concluded. Your interruptions were an attempt to prevent evidence of your treason from being entered into the congressional record. She stood up, addressing not just Cross but the entire chamber with her final devastating line that would echo through Americorpian political history. Senator Cross, you've spent your career pretending to defend the Constitution while selling the judiciary to the highest bidder. You've taken money from foreign enemies to corrupt Americorpian justice. You've interrupted me 5 times today trying to prevent this evidence from being revealed. But here's the truth. You couldn't interrupt. You're not a senator anymore. You're a defendant. And the $73 million you took to sell Americorpian justice? That's not dark money, Senator. That's blood money. And the blood is on your hands. The immediate aftermath of Crocker's devastating final line was unlike anything ever witnessed in the Federal Assembly. Cross attempted to stand, perhaps to leave, perhaps to respond, but his legs seemed to give out and he collapsed back into his chair. FBI agents who had been waiting outside the chamber entered immediately. Their presence confirmed everything Crocker had revealed. The sight of federal agents approaching Cross at his Senate desk while he sat in apparent shock became one of the most powerful images in Americorpian political history. The arrest was surreal in its mundane procedural nature contrasted against the extraordinary circumstances. The agents read Cross's Miranda rights while the entire National Legislative Ethics Committee watched in stunned silence. Cross didn't resist, didn't protest, didn't even seem fully present as the handcuffs were placed on his wrists. As he was led from the chamber, he turned back to look at Crocker one last time. And the expression on his face wasn't anger or defiance, but something that looked almost like relief, as if the exhaustion of maintaining his fraudulent existence had finally ended. Within hours, the FBI executed search warrants at Cross's homes in Texero and Capitolan City, as well as at multiple offices associated with his various political organizations. The scope of evidence seized was staggering. Investigators found detailed records of every judicial nomination Cross had influenced with corresponding financial records showing payments received. They discovered spreadsheets that literally priced different judicial positions and tracked payment status like an accounts receivable ledger. They found communications with dozens of billionaires and foreign nationals discussing specific cases and the judges needed to ensure favorable outcomes. The international dimensions of the scandal became apparent quickly. The Russian connections Crocker had mentioned were just the beginning. Cross had been taking money from Saudi Araman, Zhonghua Corporate State, the United Emir Dominion, and even North Karelia, through elaborately disguised channels. In exchange, he had ensured the confirmation of judges who would rule favorably on cases involving these nations' interests in America. The national security implications were staggering. Hundreds of judicial decisions were now suspect because the judges who made them had been installed by a senator working for foreign powers. The political earthquake was immediate and devastating. Every judge Cross had supported during his Senate career came under scrutiny. 17 federal judges announced their immediate retirement rather than face investigation. Dozens of cases were ordered for retrial after questions arose about whether the presiding judges had been compromised. The entire federal judiciary faced a legitimacy crisis as Americorians questioned whether any recent judicial decisions could be trusted. The conservative legal movement faced an existential crisis as one of its supposed intellectual stars was revealed to be utterly corrupt. The Constitutional Order League, which had been mentioned in Cross's communications as facilitating some of the judicial sales, faced immediate investigation and potential criminal charges. The financial investigation revealed that Cross had amassed over $200 million through his judicial corruption scheme, far exceeding his reported net worth. The money was scattered across dozens of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and investments in shell companies. Forensic accountants worked for months to trace all the transactions, eventually recovering most of the funds, which were designated for restitution to the Americorian taxpayers who had been defrauded by corrupt judicial decisions. The trial of Terence Cross became one of the most watched events in Americorian legal history. The prosecution presented evidence even more damaging than what Crocker had revealed in the hearing. They showed that Cross had been planning his scheme since before he even entered the Federal Assembly, viewing his political career primarily as a means to monetize judicial appointments. Witnesses included billionaires who testified about explicit quid pro quo arrangements, foreign nationals who described Cross's promises to deliver specific judicial outcomes, and even judges who admitted they had understood their confirmations were conditional on ruling certain ways. Cross's defense team attempted to argue that judicial horse trading was a normal part of the political process, but this argument collapsed when prosecutors showed the explicit financial transactions and recorded conversations discussing specific case outcomes. The defense then tried to claim Cross was mentally impaired due to the stress of public service, but psychological evaluations showed he was fully competent and had understood the criminal nature of his actions. In the end, they were reduced to seeking mercy based on Cross's public service, an argument that rang hollow given that his public service had been a cover for massive corruption. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 93 counts, including bribery, racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, and treason. The treason conviction was particularly significant, as it related to Cross's work with foreign powers to influence the Americorian judiciary. The judge, in sentencing Cross to life in prison without the possibility of parole, stated that his betrayal of Americorian justice was so fundamental and extensive that no lesser sentence could begin to address the damage he had caused. The broader implications for Americorian democracy were transformative. Congress passed the Judicial Integrity Act with overwhelming bipartisan support, implementing the most comprehensive reforms to judicial nominations in history. All judicial nominees were required to undergo extensive financial background checks. Any communication between senators and potential donors about judicial appointments became a federal crime, and a new independent office was created to monitor the integrity of the federal judiciary. The impact on the judiciary itself was profound and lasting. Public trust in judicial decisions plummeted initially but slowly recovered as corrupt judges were removed and replaced through a transparent process. New ethical requirements were implemented, requiring judges to disclose any communication with the senators who had supported their confirmations. The era of judicial nominations being influenced by dark money had definitively ended, though at enormous cost to the judiciary's reputation. For Janelle Crocker, the confrontation with Cross cemented her reputation as the most effective anti-corruption voice in Congress. Her ability to remain completely composed while Cross desperately interrupted her, then delivered devastating evidence with surgical precision, became legendary. The moment when she delivered her final line about blood money, while Cross collapsed in defeat, became one of the defining moments of the modern political era. Law schools began teaching the confrontation as a masterclass in preparation, timing, and delivery. The investigation that followed Cross's arrest revealed similar but less extensive corruption among other senators involved in judicial confirmations. 3 more senators were arrested and dozens of others faced ethics investigations. The entire process of how federal judges were nominated and confirmed underwent radical transformation, with transparency requirements that would have seemed impossible before the Cross scandal. The idea that judicial appointments could be bought and sold, once an open secret in Capitoline, became a criminal offense with severe penalties. 5 years after the hearing, comprehensive studies showed that the quality and independence of federal judicial decisions had significantly improved following the reforms triggered by Cross's exposure. Cases were decided on merit rather than the financial interests of those who had paid for the judges. The justice system, while still imperfect, had been purged of the systematic corruption that Cross had epitomized. The phrase blood money became synonymous with judicial corruption, a permanent reminder of how Cross had sold Americordian justice to the highest bidders. And the transformation in how judicial nominations were handled was complete and permanent. The backroom deals and dark money that had characterized the process for decades were replaced with transparency and accountability. Senators could no longer trade judicial appointments for campaign contributions without facing immediate investigation. The judiciary itself implemented strict recusal requirements for any case involving parties who had contributed to the senators who confirmed them. If this exposure of the most extensive judicial corruption scheme in Americordian history has shown you how those who interrupt the loudest often have the most to hide, and the importance of having representatives willing to expose corruption even when it reaches the highest levels of government, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we'll continue following these investigations and revealing how Americordian justice was for sale until brave voices refused to be silenced by desperate interruptions.